Good morning, everybody, and welcome to OP Radio. This is OP Radio number 18. We've got another great episode for you today. If it's your first time tuning into OP Radio, this is a Twitter space / podcast about anything and everything in the optimism ecosystem. We hold it as a Twitter space, but I also edit these episodes and upload them to YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Google, the major places where you listen to such things. Today's conversation is mostly going to be led by my colleague, Smith, the head of DeFi at OP Labs. Before I let him introduce himself, however, I would like our guest of honor to introduce himself. Adrian, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Mac. Thanks for inviting me here today. Really looking forward to having this chat and explaining what we do over here at the BUSD team on Binance. Just to introduce myself very quickly, I'm Adrian Tan, the Global Head of Partnerships for BUSD Unit at Binance.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adrian. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, the head of DeFi at OP Labs, Smith. Hi, Smith.
Hey, guys. Yeah, I'll just quickly introduce myself. I know Max already introduced me. I lead the DeFi team at Optimism. We work with pretty much all things partnerships on DeFi, including things like centralized exchanges, Binance, stablecoins, like the BUSD partnership we're going to be talking about today. And yeah, I'm really excited to introduce this partnership to the ecosystem and chat with Adrian here today. Cool. Yeah, so I want to get some lingo out of the way in the very beginning. We went back and forth about how we wanted to talk about this because the space is listed as Binance-Peg BUSD. So yeah, so the space is listed as Binance-Peg BUSD, now live on Optimism. So it's on a native basis, and we're going to go into the details of what that is. But just for the audience right now, Adrian, could you go into the details of what Binance-Peg BUSD is versus BUSD and explain like sort of the differences between the two?
Absolutely. And I apologize for any confusion up front. There's a reason why we call BUSD, or we make a distinction between BUSD and Binance-Peg BUSD. For most of you who are already aware, BUSD on ERC20 or Ethereum chain is actually issued by Paxos, which is a provisional OCC listed trust company, as well as regulated by the New York Department of Financial Services with regards to the issuance of our fiat-backed US dollar stablecoin BUSD. Now, the term BUSD relates specifically to the token, the stablecoin on Ethereum chain, which is why when we issue a BUSD outside of the Ethereum chain, but i.e. on Optimism in this case, we have to term it as Binance Peg BUSD. That being said, just to assure all the listeners out there, Binance-Peg BUSD ultimately would have the same underlying dollar reserves managed by Paxos. It would also have the underlying reserves that are regulated by the NYDFS. Now, how do we do that? Essentially, what we do is before we issue a single dollar of Binance-Peg BUSD, we lock up an equivalent amount of BUSD on Ethereum chain in a proof of assets or proof of collateral wallet, which users can actually view on the Binance.com website. So in that sense, we will only issue Binance-Peg BUSD when we have already locked up an equivalent or more amount of BUSD on Ethereum chain. This ensures that the backing is always at least 1-for-1, and that your underlying reserves of Binance-Peg BUSD is still going to be managed by Paxos and still going to be regulated by the NYDFS. I hope that kind of clarifies and the distinction between the two products.
Yeah, I think it clarifies it pretty well. I just want to make sure like some of the audience that aren't too familiar with stablecoins, they understand every single thing that we're talking about here. We're talking about BUSD being collateralized. It's always going to be redeemable via Paxos. Could you go into the details of like why does collateralization matter, right? So like maybe I'm a dad in Argentina. So what am I thinking of when I'm thinking about these stablecoins and the peg and all of those details?
Sure. When we go into stable coins, one of the key things that user needs to focus on when it comes to stable coins is who is managing your reserves, because ultimately a stable coin is only as good as the backing of its underlying reserves. So where are your reserves being put or invested in? Who is managing your reserves? Are they a regulated entity, or are they some third party that may or may not be regulated? Are you guaranteed a bankruptcy remote structure? So, for example, if this manager was managing the underlying reserves and they were to run into some trouble, would users have the the assurance that they can reclaim and back all the capital of the underlying reserves versus a situation as we have seen in recent times, um, where the collateral essentially is mixed in with the overall credit pool. So this concept of bankruptcy remote becomes very, very important, and it's something that we take pride in. It's something that Paxos, as our issuer, actually assure gives the users the assurance because they are a trust company. So all our dollar reserves are actually held in bankruptcy remote structures. They are only invested in highly conservative instruments. Essentially, the NYDFS, as the regulator for BUSD on Ethereum chain, only allows investments in cash deposits in FDIC insured banks. It only allows US Treasury bills or overnight reverse repos that are over collateralized and secured by US Treasury bonds. So, in terms of the risk framework of reserve management, is extremely conservative. It's way more conservative than most of the banks you would see in the TradFi space. And finally, I want to highlight a couple of points, which is, as you mentioned, it's always one-for-one redemption at Paxos. You can also redeem it on Binance.com. Of course, there are some fees involved, but the redemption process itself is also going to be one-to-one. And I'd just like to point out that Binance gives you that assurance that we actually have tested BUSD. Like, for example, if you were just to look back in December, you can tell that BUSD has already been tested and has proven itself. Billions of dollars of BUSD were actually successfully redeemed over a 24-hour period. Now, if you were to put this scenario in a lot of banks out there, you would it would have been a challenge for a lot of them. I'm pretty confident about that.
Yeah, thank you for that vote of confidence, Adrian. The way that I see stablecoins in general is that it's a spectrum, right? So we have the spectrum of you can have under collateralized, you can have this one to one, you could have over collateralized, and there are pros and cons of all of them. But at the end of the day, when you have to go through a bank run event or an event where there are a lot of redemptions happening, you want someone trusted and liquid to be able to redeem your BUSD or on-chain dollar as quickly and as safely as possible. So yeah, mad shout out to Paxos. It's been a very trusted entity. You guys have tested out BUSD as a asset class on Ethereum, and I'm excited to see that it's coming to Optimism via Binance-Peg BUSD. So yeah, I think this is good for us clarifying the differences between Binance-Peg BUSD and BUSD. For all intents and purposes, I'm going to be referring to the stablecoin as BUSD in the conversation so that it's just less of a mouthful to talk about. And this is sort of just like easier for me to say right now. So when I do say BUSD, I am referring to the Binance Peg BUSD that Adrian just went through. Cool. So yeah, we talked about the differences between the two. I'm curious what you think on why a user would choose to use BUSD. There are a lot of stablecoins out there, so I'm curious, like, what's your guys' take on BUSD adoption in general, and what you guys plan to do from here on?
Yeah, so Binance-Peg BUSD actually has a lot of ambition. So for listeners who have been tracking the progress of BUSD, I would say that it's very much a question of, coming on for the ride, I would say, because we are really in a growth spurt as far as BUSD is concerned. We are expanding rapidly across the multi-chain. We have recently announced Tron. Obviously, we are very happy to have launched natively on Optimism. previously we've launched on Avalanche and Polygon, and a lot of that was just pretty much done in the last 6 months. And we have a lot more ambitions to further expand into both EVM and non-EVM chains in the coming quarters. So I would say that, watch out for this space. We really are have an ambitious growth plan, and this is really part of our outreach to the broader ecosystem out there. And in terms of like why would the user choose Binance-Peg BUSD? Well, as I already mentioned, because number one, the underlying reserves and the issuer is highly regulated. It's always one-for-one redemption, especially at Paxos, and we've been tested. And I think obviously we've worked hard with the foundation to ensure that the incentives and the LM is in place for users to help support Binance-Peg BUSD adoption, which I'm sure you'll go into more detail later.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will definitely go into more detail there later. And yeah, I keep asking these questions to make sure I keep reiterating, right? It's a stable coin. And one of the things that we need to do as larger entities is to always educate the world on these things, make sure that they know that it's not okay to just use any stable coin, right? There are very adverse effects that can come from using maybe the wrong stable coin or with the wrong model. So we just want to educate properly on the redemption mechanism, exactly how it works, what happens in scenarios that things do go awry. So yeah, I will talk about the Optimism Foundation's liquidity mining. I think what we'll do is we'll actually say that at the end so that people understand like sort of what the CTA is. But moving on to the next question, I wanted to talk a little bit more about this partnership between Binance and Optimism and sort of as a vote of confidence for Optimism from Binance. So could you talk a little bit about the decision to launch BUSD on Optimism? Maybe why, what kind of factors you looked at, and yeah, what are the reasons and the things that you look at or view when you do launch on another ecosystem?
Absolutely. I think what I would say is that from our perspective, at least from the BUSD Binance perspective, we obviously see this as one of the key flagship partnerships that we have with the broader ecosystem. But just to give you some background as to how we think about which chain to launch or which L1, L2 that we decide to partner with, typically what we do is we make the decision on the basis of potential growth for Binance-Peg BUSD. We obviously evaluate the maturity and the popularity of chains and the protocols within the chains. And lastly, I would say the support of the foundations, the communication, the cooperation that we get from the foundations really show that level of commitment to their own ecosystem, their users, as well as their commitment to give Binance-Peg BUSD a chance for strong adoption. Now, I'm very happy to say, obviously, because we're already natively launched, that obviously Optimism Foundation scored very highly in all regards. And I'm glad to say that although we worked together a bit during the OP token launch at .com, Binance.com, this really is the first substantial partnership that we've had since then. And we're really looking forward to the growth potential that the future will bring.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to mention that little quick tidbit as well on we did work together during the OP token launch, which was a very hectic time for us. And we've been getting to maturity as an ecosystem ever since then. And now it's exciting to see us kind of go to the next step of a further partnership between the two parties. Yeah, I think I wanted to kind of jump around and double down on this question on Binance's thesis on L2. So, yeah, what do you guys think about for Ethereum alignment, and how do you think about L2s in general? So, you spoke a bit on Optimism scoring highly in all regards and the types of factors that you use to decide on whether or not to deploy BUSD on Optimism. But yeah, we're curious to hear about your guys' thesis on L2 and what you guys think for the long run.
Sure. Well, I mean, Binance.com essentially put out a report in the second half of last year in relation to our overall thesis on L2. And I'm just going to take some broad commentary from that. But essentially, given Ethereum's gas fees are still relatively high, even post the merge, we actually do fundamentally believe that L2 scaling solutions make a lot of sense, especially when it comes to driving costs down for end retail users. At Binance, we always talk about building building for users. So this is very much in that same vein. Our expansion into L2, our expansion into Optimism is very much driven by that imperative. Now, it comes to really no surprise to us that Optimism is actually in a leading position here amongst the L2s, with more than 100 protocols being deployed. We have very strong confidence in the overall momentum of L2s as a whole. And the fact that we've had such a good start with the Optimism Foundation, we have every confidence that this ecosystem will continue to grow, which, as far as I'm concerned, makes this a fantastic long-term partnership for us at BUSD.
Absolutely. And I think one of the unique positions that we're in is Optimism is still relatively a nascent ecosystem where we're still building, we're still getting newer protocols onboarded. And one of the beauties of that is Binance-Peg BUSD can grow with us, right? So it's very difficult to, I guess, grow as a stablecoin, especially after so much has happened on the ecosystem already. It almost feels like you're chasing after growth has happened. But in the case where we're growing together, we can really like design from first principles. So I think it's exciting to be able to work with Binance on that front and grow together. So before I go into like, sorry, did you have something to say, Adrian?
Thanks. I just wanted to add to a point because ultimately the way we look at L2s as well is that as L2s continue to scale up and grow, that obviously does add to the overall security of the Ethereum ecosystem, so to speak. And from our perspective, security obviously is a big concern when it comes to stablecoins. So one of the key things that we have focused on in terms of our expansion is that we tend to avoid bridges and we focus on native launches. That has been our MO, so to speak, throughout all our various chain launches. And in part, that focus is because of all the negative news and occurrences that have occurred when bridges have been used. Now, we do know that other stablecoins have used bridges significantly more frequently than ourselves. So it's also another point of distinction I thought it'd be worth highlighting.
Absolutely, yeah. And could you actually like let's talk about that a bit. So we talked about the distinction between Binance Peg BUSD and BUSD, but let's talk about what differentiates BUSD as a stablecoin. And I think you went into this idea of avoiding bridges, so we can start there. When I think about bridges, I think about something like our standard bridge. So we have a canonical bridge that we run from L1 to L2, where if you lock assets on L1, you can mint some asset on the L2 side. And that's sort of like how, in a nutshell, our bridge works. It's a bridge that like we've heard all about like bridge hacks throughout the year and exactly what that means for people. So yeah, you really do need to have like some sort of trusted entity sometimes. So could you actually give the details on the focus on this nativity idea? And what does that actually mean? Why is it more secure to have a native bridge? And kind of break down the details of what native means.
From our perspective, native is essentially is that we do not actually utilize an external third-party bridge when it comes to Binance Peg BUSD. So ultimately, Binance still controls the keys. We still control the address. I can tell you, frankly, that my tech lead at BUSD has a massive aversion to bridges. He tends to shoot down any discussion when it comes to potential partnerships with bridges right off the bat. So I would say that in essence, we tend to avoid it, period. Now, in terms of this concept of security and managing of risk, it really goes back to the overall ethos of BUSD as a whole. Now, as I mentioned before, the way we manage our reserves, very conservative. It's held in bankruptcy remote structures, again, very, very conservative. So it underlies the way we consider our responsibility as a stable coin provider. I tend to think that in bull markets, people tend not to focus and make too many distinctions between one stablecoin versus another. But really, it's only when you come to a crunch or a crisis point when you realize that actually having a stablecoin provider that has the right structures in place, that's the right regulator in place, that has the right ethos in place, that's pretty much what you want in a stablecoin.
Got it. And To kind of talk a little tactically on native BUSD and how it works. So let's say I'm a user that wants to utilize BUSD. How would I get it onto the ecosystem? Yeah, how does it work? Because traditionally, you can just go on our bridge UI and bridge BUSD over from mainnet Ethereum. How does this differ from that tactically?
Well, I think the deposit and withdrawal address from Binance has already been opened up. So essentially, users can gain access to the wider Binance user base. Now, obviously, that allows Binance users to access into the Optimism ecosystem as well, and they can then withdraw and utilize Binance-Peg BUSD accordingly. As we can go into further detail later, there are quite a few protocols that we have jointly looked at that we want to focus on to try and grow this level of adoption. So like I said, the bank is pretty much open. It's just waiting and ready for users to start accessing that pool.
Yeah, and before we go to that point, because I definitely want to get into this idea of long-term adoption, utility, and where you guys do plan to grow in the near future, I want to clarify for the users there, to onboard BUSD, it's as simple as going to the Binance platform and being able to deposit or withdraw off of their platform. And the beauty of that, obviously, is centralized exchanges are amazing on-ramps for users, right? We need them in many ways. And one of the things that we've been working on at Optimism is ensuring that we have good access to fiat on ramps and off ramps, right? So we want to make sure that users can get onto Optimism very easily and off of Optimism very easily. That is a very necessary piece of infrastructure for us, and this integration definitely helps provide that. We also have this idea of a 7-day withdrawal issue, or not an issue, but a 7-day withdrawal limitation when you use our standard bridge. And this is mainly for security and safety as well. But for users that need to have liquid BUSD and want to on ramp and off ramp off of Optimism, they can do it very quickly and instantly on the Binance platform now. So, yeah, super excited about that partnership. Like I said, we've been working on the infrastructure to get people onto Optimism and have that friction be much easier to onboard. And yeah, I also want to quickly mention that this is a culmination of a lot of people's work. So yeah, we've been working closely with Adrian and the wider Binance team, but to get this past the finish line, it's just, yeah, major shout out to all the parties involved. So yeah, I had a great time talking to Adrian. I'm super excited for this partnership as mentioned. And if there are any extra thoughts that you want to get out, yeah, definitely feel free to shout out some CTAs and your details, and I'll just pass it over to Mac.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to end off, I'd like to, just say that, we'd like to express our thanks and gratitude to the foundation for working with us. And we definitely look forward to the further expansion within the Optimism ecosystem. And we look forward to interacting and engaging with end users. We always focus on the users, and this is just a continuation of that effort. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. Yeah, and I just want to say I thought this was an incredibly interesting conversation, especially the distinction between different stablecoins. So I just want to echo what Smith said and say we're really excited to this long-term partnership, as he said, and can't wait to see what's next. And with that, I think we'll wrap this episode of OP Radio up. Don't forget that you can listen to past episodes of OP Radio on YouTube, Spotify, Google, and Apple. And thanks so much, Smith and Adrian, for joining us and leading this interesting conversation. And we'll see you on the internet. Thanks, y'all. Stay optimistic.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.